There are mornings in this job when the coffee doesn't taste right. Not because Christina made it wrong. She never does. Strong and black, the Italian way, the way my father taught us. But because something about the day ahead sits heavy before it even starts. That Tuesday morning in October was one of those mornings. I remember getting to the courthouse at 8:15, same as always. 40 years on this bench, and I still can't shake the habit my father drilled into me when I was barely old enough to understand what a courthouse was. Frank, he used to say, lacing up his work boots before the sun came up, if you're not early, you're already behind. So there I was, 8:15, docket in hand, Christina's coffee steaming on the corner of my desk, going through the morning's cases the way I always do, methodically, one by one, preparing myself for whatever Providence had decided to send through my doors that day. Most mornings, the docket is predictable. Traffic violations, parking disputes, minor infractions. The ordinary business of a city trying to keep itself in order. I've read thousands of dockets over 4 decades, and after a while you develop a rhythm. Your eyes move down the page, your mind processes the names and charges, and you begin forming a picture of the morning ahead. But that Tuesday, my eyes stopped moving. Just stopped, right there in the middle of the page, like they'd hit a wall. I set down my coffee. I picked up the page and read the name again, slowly, the way you read something when you're not sure your eyes are working correctly. General Raymond Hargrove, United States Army, 4 stars, contempt of court. I sat with that for a moment. In 40 years, I have had doctors stand before my bench and argue that their schedules were too important for court appearances. I've had politicians send lawyers with carefully worded letters explaining why they couldn't be present. I've had businessmen worth $50 million tell me to my face that civil servants didn't have the right to question them. Every kind of powerful person this city and this country produces, at some point, they find their way into a courtroom. And every single one of them, without exception, arrived believing that their title was going to mean something to me. But a 4-star general? In 40 years, that was a first. I pulled the full file. General Raymond Hargrove, known throughout his career as Iron Ray, a nickname he'd earned not from warmth, but from the kind of rigid, uncompromising command style that either produces exceptional soldiers or breaks them entirely. 34 years of service, 2 wars, decorated more times than most men are thanked in a lifetime. On paper, he was everything this country holds up as an example of duty and sacrifice. But here's what the paper also showed me. A young soldier from Providence, Rhode Island, Private First Class Marcus Webb, 22 years old, had filed a formal complaint through proper military channels 9 months ago, reporting repeated abuse by a superior officer in his unit. He followed the process exactly as he was supposed to. He documented everything. He submitted everything through the right channels. He did what an honorable soldier does when he sees something wrong. And 14 months ago, 3 days after that complaint reached General Hargrove's office, Private Marcus Webb received his discharge papers, signed personally by the general. Marcus Webb lost everything. His military career, which he had worked toward since he was 15 years old. His benefits, the health care, the housing allowance, the educational support that was supposed to be his future. He lost his apartment within 60 days because without those benefits, he couldn't make rent. A federal civil rights attorney took his case pro bono after reading about it in a local paper. The court ordered General Hargrove to appear as a material witness, not as a defendant, just a witness, to answer questions about the timeline of that discharge. He ignored the first summons. He ignored the second. And that is how a 4-star general ended up on my docket on a Tuesday morning in October, charged with contempt of court. I looked up from the file and took in my courtroom. It was fuller than usual for that hour. There were men in the back rows, 4 of them, wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite sit right. The kind of men whose posture gives away a lifetime of military discipline regardless of what they're wearing. There was a JAG attorney, a woman in full Army uniform, sitting near the aisle with a briefcase on her lap and an expression that told me she'd rather be anywhere else. And there, in the very front row of the gallery, sitting perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap, was a woman I didn't recognize from the docket, but understood immediately. She wore a navy blue dress that had been pressed carefully, the kind of careful that comes from wanting to look respectful without having much to work with. A small silver cross at her throat, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes fixed on the empty space at the front of the courtroom, waiting. I later learned her name was Eleanor Webb, 54 years old. She worked at a laundromat on Broad Street, 6 days a week, on her feet for 8 hours a shift. She had taken an unpaid day off to be here. She had ridden 2 buses across Providence to sit in my courtroom and watch the legal system do what it was supposed to do for her son, a son who was currently sleeping in his car somewhere in Virginia because the country he served had taken everything from him for telling the truth. She had been fighting this for 14 months, writing letters, making phone calls, sitting in waiting rooms. Nobody had listened. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. I looked at Eleanor Webb sitting in that front row in her Sunday dress, and I looked back down at the name on my docket, and I thought about my father, Giuseppe Caprio, who came to this country from a small village in southern Italy with nothing but the clothes on his back and a set of values so clear and sturdy you could have built a house on them. He worked construction, factory floors, night security, whatever the city needed, whatever kept food on our table. And he taught me one thing above everything else. He said, "Frank, in this country, the law is the great equalizer. Rich or poor, powerful or struggling, the law looks at everyone the same. Don't you ever let anyone make you forget that. Not for a badge, not for a title, not for anything." I set down the file. I picked up my coffee. And right on schedule, at 9:30 on the dot, the doors at the back of my courtroom swung open, and General Raymond Hargrove walked in. Not the way a defendant walks in, uncertain, aware of their situation, respectful of the space. He walked in the way a man walks into a room he believes belongs to him. Chin up, shoulders back, 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder, chest full of medals catching the light with every step. His aide-de-camp was half a pace behind him carrying a briefcase. His JAG attorney rose immediately from her seat. And the general himself, he didn't look at Eleanor Webb, didn't acknowledge the gallery, didn't acknowledge me. He moved to the defense table like a man arriving at a briefing he hadn't requested and didn't intend to take seriously. He sat down without being told to, and he looked around my courtroom the way a general surveys terrain, not with respect, but with assessment, deciding what mattered and what didn't. In 40 years, I have developed a very reliable instinct for the moment a case stops being routine. This was that moment. Whatever was going to happen in the next hour, it wasn't going to be ordinary. I could feel it in the room, in the stillness of the men in the back rows, in the quiet dignity of Eleanor Webb's folded hands, in the way every other person in that courtroom had gone completely still, like they understood without being told that something important was about to happen. I took one more sip of Christina's coffee, set the cup down, and I called the court to order. Christina called the room to order, and every person in that courtroom rose. Every person except one. General Raymond Hargrove remained seated, arms folded, jaw set, staring straight ahead like standing was something that happened to other people. I've seen this before. The millionaire who thought money bought him exemptions. The police chief who thought his badge made him untouchable. But there was something different about this particular brand of arrogance. This man had spent 34 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered. Rising for anyone wasn't just uncomfortable for him. It was genuinely inconceivable. I gave him the benefit of the doubt for exactly 3 seconds. General Hargrove, I said, keeping my voice level and professional, please rise for the court. He turned his head toward me slowly, the way a man turns to look at something mildly interesting outside a car window. Judge Caprio, he said, his voice carrying the deep, unhurried authority of a man who had commanded 80,000 soldiers. I've been standing at attention since I was 18 years old. I think I've earned the right to sit. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Not the polite quiet of a room waiting for proceedings to begin. The held breath silence of people who couldn't believe what they just heard. I looked past him for just a moment. Eleanor Webb, front row, hands still folded, eyes now fixed on the general's back. She had ridden 2 buses to be here. She had pressed that navy dress the night before. She had spent 14 months writing letters that nobody answered. And this man couldn't stand up for 30 seconds. I removed my glasses, slowly, deliberately, the way I do when I need a moment to make sure what comes out of my mouth next is exactly right. General, I said, standing for the court isn't a military courtesy, it's the law. The same law that brought you here this morning. His jaw tightened. And then he said the thing that changed the entire temperature of that room. Judge Caprio, he said, leaning forward slightly, voice dropping into the register he probably used to silence rooms full of officers. I outrank every judge in this country. What happens in this courtroom is, professionally speaking, beneath my authority. I suggest we move through this quickly so we can both get back to more important matters. The room didn't just go silent, it stopped breathing. Federal Attorney Claire Donovan stood up from the prosecutor's table. Young woman, maybe 32, 33. The kind of lawyer who doesn't need to raise her voice because the facts do all the heavy lifting for her. She approached the bench with a folder thick enough to tell its own story before a single page was turned. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to present the timeline of Private Marcus Webb's discharge. I nodded. The general leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, the picture of a man enduring an inconvenience. Donovan laid it out methodically, piece by piece, the way a good prosecutor does, not dramatically, just clearly. Private Webb filed his formal abuse complaint on March 4th through the correct military channels, documented and time-stamped. The complaint was received and logged by General Hargrove's office on March 7th. An internal memo was generated the same day, and here Donovan paused, picking up a single sheet and reading from it carefully. The memo, written by an aide in the general's office, read, "Handle the Webb situation before it becomes a headline." 3 days later, on March 10th, Private Marcus Webb received his discharge papers, signed by General Raymond Hargrove personally. The courtroom absorbed that timeline in silence. 3 days. A formal complaint about abuse, received on a Tuesday. A young soldier's entire life dismantled by Friday. Eleanor Webb in the front row didn't make a sound. She just closed her eyes for a moment, like someone who had known this truth for 14 months and was only now hearing it spoken out loud in a room where it legally mattered. The general's JAG attorney was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, she said, military discharge procedures involve complex command decisions that civilian courts are not equipped to evaluate. The chain of command exists precisely to ensure that operational integrity is maintained without external interference. General Hargrove acted within his full legal authority as commanding officer. I let her finish. Then I looked at the general directly. General, I said, your office received a formal abuse complaint from a soldier who followed every correct procedure. 3 days later, that soldier lost his career, his benefits, and his housing. Would you like to explain that timeline to this court? He met my eyes without flinching. Judge Caprio, he said, his voice flat and certain, soldiers who undermine unit cohesion by filing unsubstantiated complaints create operational risk. Command decisions are made to protect the integrity of the mission. If you proceed with this line of questioning, I will have my legal team contact the Department of Defense before end of business today. I'd strongly advise you to consider whether this courtroom has the jurisdiction to second-guess military command authority. I took off my glasses, set them down on the bench, and I looked at this man, his 4 stars, his medals, his 34 years of decorated service, and I thought about Marcus Webb sleeping in his car in Virginia. 22 years old, did everything right, lost everything anyway. If you believe that no rank, no uniform, no amount of medals gives any man the right to destroy a young soldier's life and walk away without answer, subscribe to this channel right now and share this video, because what I'm about to do in the next few minutes will show every powerful person watching that in my courtroom, your stars don't protect you from the truth. I put my glasses back on. General Hargrove, I said, my voice completely calm, this court has full jurisdiction over contempt proceedings and federal civil rights matters. Your calls to the Department of Defense are your right. Make them after we're finished. Right now, you're going to sit in this courtroom and answer for what that timeline means. I have delivered thousands of verdicts in 40 years. Parking fines, assault charges, contempt citations, criminal sentences. After a while, the mechanics of it become second nature. You weigh the evidence, you apply the law, you speak clearly so everyone in the room understands exactly what is happening and why. But there are moments, rare ones, where a verdict carries weight beyond the charges on the page, where what you're really sentencing isn't just the violation in front of you, but everything that violation represents. This was one of those moments, and I wanted General Hargrove to feel every word of it before I was finished. I folded my hands on the bench and looked at him directly. General Hargrove, I said, let me tell you what this court has established this morning. You are lawfully subpoenaed as a material witness in a federal civil rights proceeding. You ignored that summons twice, not because of a national security emergency, not because of an operational crisis, but because you made a decision that a civilian court did not have the standing to require your presence. That decision was wrong. It was contempt of court on both occasions, and it is contempt of court today. His jaw was tight, but he said nothing. I continued. The evidence presented by Federal Attorney Donovan this morning establishes a timeline that this court finds deeply troubling. A formal abuse complaint received on a Tuesday, an internal memo instructing staff to handle the situation before it becomes a headline, and a discharge order signed by your hand on Friday of the same week. General, that is not command authority, that is retaliation, and this court is treating it accordingly. His JAG attorney rose again. Your Honor, I must strongly object. I raised my hand. Counselor, sit down. She sat. I looked back at the general. For the first time since he walked into my courtroom, something shifted behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet, but the first faint recognition that this was not going to end the way he had planned it. Here is your sentence, General. For 2 counts of criminal contempt of court, you will serve 72 hours in federal civilian holding. Not military holding, civilian. Because the law you held yourself above is a civilian law, and you will answer to it in a civilian facility like any other defendant who believed they were above it. His face went pale. Your Honor, his attorney began again. Counselor, I said, I won't ask you again. She closed her mouth. Additionally, you will pay $50,000 in restitution to be placed directly into a legal fund for Private Marcus Webb, covering his lost back pay, his lost benefits, and his legal fees. Your decorated service to this country is noted and respected, but it does not entitle you to financially destroy a 22-year-old soldier who did the right thing. The money you pay will begin to repair what your signature took from him. Furthermore, I am referring the full evidence package presented today, including that internal memo, to the Department of Defense Inspector General for immediate review of Private Webb's discharge. You wanted to call the Department of Defense, General? Now you won't have to. I'll reach out on your behalf. That landed like a stone